There's something unsettling about houses that look too perfect. At 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York, a colonial-style house sits peacefully on a quiet suburban street. With its neatly trimmed lawn, iconic quarter-moon windows, and view of the Amityville River, it could be mistaken for the dream home in a magazine spread. Boats rock gently on the dock behind the house. The breeze rustles the trees. It all feels calm, almost too calm. Yet even the most charming places can harbor unspeakable secrets. The house remained empty for over a year, a silence that clung to it like thick fog. Locals avoided walking past at night. Lights flickered inside when no one lived there. And sometimes, late at night, people claimed they could hear muffled crying, or worse, screams that seemed to come from beneath the floorboards. It all started with a gruesome crime. A family murdered, 6 lives stolen while they slept in their beds. No signs of struggle, no cries for help, just silence, the kind that follows something evil. But the horror didn't end there. When the Lutz family moved in 13 months later, they hoped to find peace in their new beginning. Instead, they found something waiting for them, watching, listening, breathing just behind the walls. And for the next 28 days, the house made sure they never felt safe again. It was December of 1975, when George and Kathy Lutz, along with Kathy's 3 children from a previous marriage, moved into the house at 112 Ocean Avenue. The winter in Amityville was particularly quiet that year, with fresh snow blanketing the lawns and turning every home into a postcard. George, a land surveyor with a strong build and neatly trimmed beard, believed he had finally found the perfect place to settle down and build a future. Kathy, soft-spoken and spiritual, fell in love with the spacious layout and the river view. The kids, Daniel, Christopher, and Melissa, ran through the halls with wide eyes and eager laughter. The home had been offered at a shockingly low price, a detail George had hesitated over only briefly. The realtor was up front. She explained the DeFeo murders, how Ronald DeFeo Jr. had shot and killed his entire family in that very house the previous year. But George and Kathy, practical and optimistic, believed in fresh starts. What happened before, they reasoned, didn't have to affect them. They were alive, together, and in love. That was enough. The first day passed without incident. They unpacked, ordered pizza, and explored the house's many rooms. Melissa, just 5 years old, took an immediate liking to a small sewing room tucked near the 3rd floor. She said she had made an imaginary friend named Jody who liked to sit on the windowsill and talk to her. George chuckled when he heard about Jody. It reminded him of how kids often conjured up playmates to deal with stress. But Kathy wasn't laughing. She had grown up in a religious household and sensed something heavy in the air. Before they moved in, she had asked a priest, Father Mancuso, to bless the home just to be safe. The blessing was where things began to unravel. Father Mancuso arrived the second day. As he moved from room to room, quietly sprinkling holy water and whispering prayers, he hesitated when he reached one of the upstairs bedrooms, the room where Ronald DeFeo had killed 2 of his brothers. The temperature dropped noticeably, and an overwhelming sense of dread settled in the space. The priest tried to continue, but was interrupted by a deep, masculine voice commanding him, "Get out!" Staggering out of the room, he didn't tell the family what had happened. He didn't want to frighten them, but he left quickly, and later that night, fell ill with an unshakable fever. He never returned to the house. Back at Ocean Avenue, small things began to change. George, once warm and rational, grew withdrawn. He became obsessed with the fireplace, insisting it was always too cold. He began waking up at 3:15 a.m. every night. Later, discovering that this was the exact time the DeFeo murders had taken place. Kathy noticed changes in her children, too. They became more irritable, more distant. Melissa insisted that Jody was real, and not only that, Jody could change shape, sometimes appearing as a pig with glowing red eyes, sometimes as a dark figure standing behind her door. Doors slammed on their own. Cold spots formed in hallways. A black, sticky substance oozed from the keyholes and outlets. But the Lutzes kept telling themselves it could be explained. The house was old. The plumbing was bad. The winter air caused drafts. Logical, comforting excuses. But the days grew darker, literally. Even during daylight, the rooms appeared dim and shadowed. George stopped going to work. He shaved less, ate less, spoke in a dull monotone. He spent hours chopping wood. Even when they had enough, he began reading strange books, occult texts and grimoires, trying to understand what was happening to him. Kathy had nightmares of being levitated from the bed, her body floating above the sheets. She woke with scratches on her chest and bruises, on her thighs. One night, she dreamed of the murders so vividly she could smell the gunpowder. When she opened her eyes, George was standing over her, his face blank, holding an axe. She screamed, and he dropped it, confused, not sure how he had even gotten there. The walls groaned at night like the house was breathing. Swarms of flies appeared in rooms with closed windows. The dog barked at corners where nothing stood. And all the while, a feeling grew among the family. Not fear exactly, but a gnawing certainty that they were not alone, that something wanted them gone. Still, they stayed. For weeks, they endured the unexplainable, believing they could outlast whatever haunted the place. They told no one. They held each other close. They prayed. But evil does not grow weaker when ignored. It grows patient. And the house was very, very patient. By the second week in the house, the tension had grown so thick it was nearly visible, like a fog that clung to the corners of every room. The Lutzes were no longer laughing, no longer exploring their home. They moved carefully now, speaking in hushed tones, glancing over their shoulders even in the daylight. It was Kathy who noticed the shift first. Not just in George, but in the very fabric of the home. Her dreams had turned violent. Always the same, blood-slicked stares, children's voices calling from under the floorboards, a shadowy figure watching from the hallway mirror. And when she woke, her sheets were soaked in sweat, her limbs too heavy to move. One morning, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror and let out a gasp. Her face, smooth and youthful just days earlier, looked sunken, aged. Her skin was pale, eyes dark and hollow. She cried out for George, but by the time he came in, the image had returned to normal. Still, the mirror seemed to mock her. George was slipping further into a trance-like state. He spent hours outside, chopping wood even in freezing weather, stacking it into large, uneven piles like he was preparing for something. He barely ate. His beard grew wild, his eyes glassy. And at exactly 3:15 a.m. every night, he would jolt awake and walk through the house, sometimes to the boathouse, other times to the basement, always alone. Sometimes he wouldn't remember doing it. Other times he claimed he was checking for intruders. It was Daniel, the oldest of the children, who came to his mother one night and whispered, "Dad scares me." Kathy didn't know what to say. She was scared, too. The paranormal events became bolder. The black sludge that had once dripped quietly from electrical outlets now bubbled, moving like it had a mind of its own. A crucifix on the wall spun upside down, then dropped to the floor, landing in the shape of a perfect cross. Melissa's imaginary friend Jody had grown demanding. The little girl would scream at night, telling her mother that Jody wouldn't let her sleep. She said Jody didn't like George, and that Jody wanted the family to go away forever. In the middle of one bitterly cold night, Kathy was awakened by something tugging at her sheets. At first, she thought it was Melissa, but when she opened her eyes, the room was empty, and yet the tugging continued. She turned toward George, but he was already awake, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling. "I saw it," he whispered. "It was hovering over you." What was? A figure. It had red eyes. The dog, Harry, began acting erratically, growling at corners, refusing to enter the kitchen, barking violently at the basement door. One night, they found the basement light turned on, though no one had been down there. When George flipped the switch to turn it off, the bulb shattered. Even worse, there were rooms that seemed to vanish. Kathy, looking for stored Christmas decorations in the basement, stumbled upon a small hidden room behind a false wall. It was painted blood red, had no windows, and was filled with the foulest stench she had ever known. They would later discover that no such room appeared on the house plans. The family tried to rationalize. They told themselves it was stress, that the horror of what had happened in the house a year prior was seeping into their imaginations. But that logic grew harder to maintain as the physical world bent further. Kathy's body would be marked by invisible hands. Red welts appeared down her spine. Once she was thrown from the bed by an unseen force. The children complained of being pushed, slapped, or having their blankets yanked off in the night. And George began to change in a way that frightened even him. He would stand for hours in front of the mirror, not shaving, not blinking. He muttered to himself. Once, Kathy found him in the study, staring at blueprints of the house, obsessively drawing lines from room to room, tracing patterns over and over again. When she asked what he was doing, he looked up with empty eyes and said, "The house. It's not built right, it's like a gate." "A gate to what?" she asked. He didn't answer. On the 17th day, the atmosphere shifted again. The sounds became clearer. The Lutzes now heard footsteps pacing directly above them when no one was upstairs. Doors opened by themselves, slowly, as if someone were watching from behind them. Objects levitated and slammed to the ground. A window shattered inward, though. The wind outside was calm. The walls would throb faintly, as if the house had a heartbeat, and the temperature dropped below freezing in rooms with working radiators. The family reached out for help. Kathy called Father Mancuso again, desperate for answers. He warned her to leave. He had been plagued by illness ever since his visit. Blisters on his hands, a strange, persistent cough, and the voice that had told him to leave the house. It had returned in his dreams. "Something resides in that house," he said over the phone. "It's not human." That night, Kathy had the worst dream yet. She was standing in the hallway holding the children while the walls bled around her. A deep voice laughed from the floorboards, and a black figure with no face pointed to George, who stood beside the fireplace, covered in blood. When she woke up, George was gone. She found him in the boathouse, shivering, barefoot in the snow, holding an axe. He didn't remember walking there. He didn't even remember going outside. The next day, Kathy walked into the kitchen to find every cabinet and drawer wide open, chairs stacked on the table in a perfect pyramid. The refrigerator was running but warm inside. The dog whined in the corner, its fur standing on end. They no longer felt alone. The line between nightmare and reality had blurred completely. The house seemed alive now, intelligent and angry. The children refused to sleep alone. George was unrecognizable. Kathy began lighting candles in every room and praying in whispers. But it wasn't enough. They had lasted 3 weeks, but the house had other plans for the final night. It was the 28th night. The wind outside was calm, yet inside the house, it howled through the hallways like something alive. The air was thick, heavy with a presence that wrapped around the family like a shroud. The temperature had dropped again, but this time it was accompanied by something worse. An overwhelming silence that felt expectant. The day had passed, without incident, and for a moment, Kathy believed maybe it was over. Maybe the worst had passed, but when the clock struck 3:15 a.m., the atmosphere shifted, as if some invisible switch had been thrown. Kathy awoke first. Her body was frozen, her breath visible in the dark. She felt the weight immediately, something unseen, pressing down on her chest. Across the room, George sat up in bed, but it wasn't a sudden jolt like before. He rose slowly, unnaturally, slow, his eyes dull and empty, like he wasn't really awake. Then, the children's screams tore through the stillness. Kathy bolted from bed, the weight suddenly gone. Her feet touched the cold wooden floor and she ran, her nightgown dragging, behind her like a phantom. The hallway was pitch black. Every light bulb in the house had died at once. From Melissa's room came frantic sobbing. From Daniel's, a thudding sound, something being slammed again and again. As Kathy reached for the door, she heard it. A voice, low, deep, not human, speaking in a language she couldn't understand, the words echoing through the hallway like an incantation. It was coming from inside the house, not from one room, but all around her. She burst into Melissa's room and found her daughter curled. In the corner, her hands over her ears, eyes wide in horror. "Mommy, Jody's mad!" she cried. "She says Daddy's going to hurt us!" Across the hall, George was already in Daniel's room. He stood at the foot of the boy's bed, clutching the axe from the boathouse. Daniel was backed into the corner, trembling. Kathy screamed his name. "George!" And for a moment, something shifted in his eyes. He blinked, looked around, confused, as if waking from a terrible dream. But the moment passed. The temperature dropped again. So fast the windows frosted over in an instant. The crucifix on the wall cracked and fell, and the house groaned, not like wood creaking, but like something alive, breathing. Kathy grabbed the children and ran down the stairs, shouting for George to follow. The front door slammed shut on its own. The staircase bent and warped under her feet as if resisting her descent. Pictures flew from the walls. Cabinets slammed open and shut in the kitchen. The chandelier swung violently, though there was no wind. In the living room, the floor buckled and cracked open, just slightly, revealing what looked like black earth beneath, as if the house was trying to open its own grave. Kathy turned just in time to see George at the top of the stairs, pale and shaking. I almost hurt him," he whispered. "I wasn't myself." She ran to him, grabbing his hand. "We have to leave," she said softly, holding his gaze. They didn't wait to pack. They didn't gather belongings. Barefoot, in nightclothes, they carried the children through the frigid night and fled from the house. As they stepped outside, the air warmed. The silence lifted, and behind them, the house stood quietly in the dark, its windows staring back like watchful eyes. Still, patient, as if it had simply let them go. But Kathy could feel it. Whatever had awakened inside the house wasn't finished. The family never returned. They left behind their furniture, their possessions, everything. The house stood as it was, exactly as they had fled it. And in the days that followed, neighbors swore they saw shadows moving through the windows, even when no one lived inside. In the quiet that followed their departure, the once beautiful Dutch colonial stood still, like a slumbering creature. Realtors came and went. Potential buyers toured the home, smiling politely, commenting on the architecture, but they never stayed long. Something about the house unsettled them, even in daylight. Kathy and George, along with their children, found shelter hundreds of miles away, refusing to speak about those final nights for a long time. But silence didn't erase the memory. The dreams persisted, of cold breath in the dark, of unseen things whispering in corners of that house, watching. They spoke to priests, to investigators, to journalists. Each time, the story came out slightly different, not because they were unsure, but because the details were too strange to fit neatly into words. The media called it a hoax. Skeptics scoffed. Yet no one who entered that house after them ever stayed long. Even Father Mancuso, the priest who had blessed the house at the start, refused to return. He had fallen gravely ill not long after his visit. He had heard the voice too, that force, telling him to get out. And he believed it had followed him, haunting his dreams, shadowing his days. For the Lutzes, life went on. Slowly, the children grew older, and though they seldom spoke of the house, its presence lingered between them, an unspoken understanding that what happened had changed them all. George and Kathy aged quickly in those years, their faces etched with memories of something few would ever believe. And yet, in moments of stillness, Kathy would sometimes wake in the middle of the night and reach for George's hand just to make sure he was still there. In the quiet of their new home, no matter how peaceful, the silence still reminded her of something. Waiting. They never went back to Long Island, not even to visit, but others did. Ghost hunters, paranormal experts, authors. Some stayed for a night, others just a few hours. The reports varied. Cold spots, voices, faces in the windows, mysterious handprints, but none stayed long enough to truly know. And the house, it still stands. The red room in the basement was sealed off. The walls were repainted. The infamous quarter-moon windows were changed. But beneath the renovations, the bones of the house remain unchanged, and those who live nearby say the house feels different at night. Not evil, exactly, just aware. Some houses are built on land. Others are built on silence, on sorrow, on things that never truly died. And though the Lutz family escaped with their lives, what followed them could not be boxed, buried, or forgotten, because the true horror of Amityville isn't what happened inside those walls, but the fact that the house still waits, quiet and patient, for the next family who dares to call it home.